Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 2025 Cycle Touring Festival. It's like, I don't know, maybe the 100th, the 1000th Cycle Touring Festival. We've been going on for many, many years. Before I introduce you to tonight's speaker, let's get all of the housekeeping stuff out of the way. If you have any questions for tonight's speaker, then if you can please put them in the Q&A box rather than the chat box, that will make my life much easier at the end. But the chat right now is for everyone to introduce themselves, say hello, say where you're from. You can sort of select so that everyone sees what you say. Um, got someone already saying that they're from Caithness. I can wave at you from Inverness. Um, already got lots going on in the chat. Great. The Cycle Touring Festival has been going on since 2015. It's been a mixture of in-person events and virtual events over the years, but everything we do is with the aim of bringing people together and encourage and inspire each other to explore the world by bike. The bicycle is the finest means of transport if you want to see the world at a sensible speed. And being able to take it all in at the same time and actually making some degree of progress. I didn't write that. Laura wrote that, but I agree with everything she's written there. Um, the festival is all organized by volunteers. No employees and speakers give up their time for free because they understand the value and joy of being part of this wonderful community. We don't want cost to be a barrier, so all the talks this week are free. However, we do have overhead. It costs about £1,000 a year to keep the website, mailing list, and so on going. We occasionally pay for a small amount of admin time on top of that as well. So we please request donations to help cover these costs. The suggested amount is £5 per talk or £20 for the whole festival per household. But please do just give whatever you feel is appropriate. This pay as you go, pay as you go, pay as you feel model has worked out for us so far, and we've always covered our costs. But we know from past virtual events that only around one-third of attendees will actually donate. So do please consider it. The link to the PayPal for this will be in the chat at the start, and also we'll repeat at the end. Another little reminder, questions please in the Q&A box because it's quite hard for me to keep track of the chat. And yeah, so let me introduce tonight's speaker. Tonight we have Tim Norton, who has cycled from Gibraltar to Gibraltar Farm. I was attracted to this talk simply by that title. I love a bit of that. How aesthetic is that, going from one place name to the other? That is wonderful. Tim has been cycling for well over 50 years. He's done everything from time trials to touring. He takes his camper van across to the continent to watch the Tour de France and all kinds of other bike races, and is basically an absolute bike nut. And I'm sure you will all enjoy listening to him talk about this wonderful journey. So without any further ado, take it away, Tim.
Thank you very much. Right, I hope I'm on. Hope you can hear me and see me. Thanks, Steve. Before I started cycling from Gibraltar, there were two significant events. Firstly, an interview on Gibraltar TV and radio squeezed into the lunchtime break of coverage of the corruption trial involving the forced retirement of the Commissioner of Police. There's been nothing online about the outcome since, and though it was hot news when I arrived there in April 2024 to begin my ride, I was only passing through, not examining the politics. Secondly, unpacking my bike from its cardboard transportation, I was surprised, then dismayed, to find a musette containing nearly 3 kilograms of bicycle tools that I honestly thought were on the bench in my bike shed. How they made their way into the package, I had no idea, but it meant the second event was to find a post office, or the post office, and send them home if the postage would be less than the tools cost to replace. 3 kilograms and £22 lighter, Jib uses British pounds, not euros, I was in a position to head off towards the Spanish border. 30 minutes later, I'd crossed the airport runway, been waved through border control, and could enjoy the warm sunshine of Southern Europe. So I'd like to talk about who, what, where, why, and how to add some structure to my talk. I can quickly get the why out of the way. With no deep significance, I liked the idea of two bookends of Gibraltar and Gibraltar Farm. It was a good idea for a bike ride dreamed up in the dark days of COVID lockdown. The more important why came after deciding the route and getting the necessary encouragement from my wife when I learned of a good friend, Andy, whose son and daughter were running the London Marathon to raise funds, as their father had been diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. I'm not keen on organised sponsored rides, as for me, cycling is certainly no hardship, and riding often is what I've looked forward to in retirement. However, I made it clear I was self-funding this trip and found people to be very generous in giving towards research and science carried out by Muscular Dystrophy UK. So the next is where. Google Maps told me it should be about 1,700 miles. I managed to spin it out to 1,982 miles by flying to and beginning the first few miles in Gibraltar, where pubs serve London beer and chips with everything. Entering Spain, steeply up and then downhill, Tarifa was my first stop, where for a few minutes I became the most southerly person on mainland Europe. Strangely, on the beach nearby, none of the sun worshippers seemed to be interested in this achievement. After passing Cape Trafalgar, on the peninsula of Cadiz, I discovered the two bridges across the massive bay, which were the only exits to the north, were both prohibited to bicycles. Discovering this late in the afternoon led me to finding I was 5 minutes too late for the last ferry across the bay. Over the road from the ferry, ticket office man at Cadiz railway station sold me a ticket for an imminent train around the bay that left just before I made it onto the platform. So I indulged in an enforced hotel stay overnight with coffee and churros for breakfast before returning to the ferry terminal the following morning. Then the ferry was cancelled due to high winds. My bike was hustled onto a coach along with me and a dozen other tourists to be transported over the prohibited bridges. It wasn't really what I wanted, but I didn't count it in my total mileage. Of course, if I had, that probably would have taken me over the 2,000-mile mark. Jerez de la Frontera was my next destination. The numbers of sherry producers led to the obvious affluence of the city. Jerez, pronounced Jerez locally, leads to sherry as the anglicisation of the local drink. De la Frontera means of the frontier because it was on the border between Islamic and Christian populations. The multicultural influence is obvious in many ways in this part of Spain, not least of all because of the architecture, the food, and the people. Sherry is made from white grapes and fortified after fermentation with brandy, I discovered. In Portugal, port is also made in a similar way by fortifying wine with spirit. On the road, I passed through this place, Arcos, then approached Seville, with its beautiful boulevards, fabulous basilica, amazing Moorish architecture, and most expensive campsite on the outskirts, catering for as many motorhomes as it was possible to squeeze within its perimeter. The selling point of Merida is the Roman architecture, with an aqueduct running 6 kilometers from a reservoir in the hills. You can actually see where the aqueduct would have been right on the top of this structure. It struck me that it might have been simpler to build the city nearer the reservoir, but I didn't mention it. I also started to wonder about everything that the Romans did. How did one city produce so many soldiers, engineers, builders, and architects? It turns out Romans were a civilization, not just people from the city that we now know in Italy. I made the mistake of asking if I could keep the bike in my town centre Airbnb room. No, was the emailed answer. It had to go in the multi-storey car park next door. Fair enough. I had a good lock and I was staying 2 days. It turned out I would be charged €10 each day. I had to take the bike out on day one to find a bike shop, so I paid up. But on day two, early morning rush hour motorists engaged the authoritarian gatekeeper while I sneaked out through another entrance. €20 to park a bicycle when I'm from Yorkshire. A number of people have asked me whether I visited Cáceres, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, with Gothic and Renaissance architecture, cobbled medieval streets, palaces, and 12th century Moorish city walls. At the time, I was unsure why I gave it a miss. Now, looking back in my notes and maps, I cycled actually to the east to what seemed the most convenient campsite, Las Grulas. Reception was closed when I arrived, so I did as the sign requested there and pitched my tent to pay later. That was when I noticed the mostly male motorhomers, bronzed, tall, elegant, and in couples. Most of the registration plates were Dutch, and without much hesitation, I deduced it was a naturist site. Back at reception, it did make that clear, but it had been a long, hot day, and I was grateful to stop riding and find a campsite with a pool. The rules were clear. Clothing obliged in the parking lot and reception. Naturism obliged on the terrace of the swimming pool and in the swimming pool. Overleaf, the leaflet confirmed, on the terrace and in the swimming pool, you are required to be naked. So I was. Don't get excited, there's no more pictures. Salamanca. Let me tell you about Salamanca. It has two cathedrals, imaginatively named the Old Cathedral and, yes, the New Cathedral. There's a most extensive Plaza Mayor with elegant colonnades housing classy shops, restaurants, and bars. Plaza Mayor translates as the far less romantic main square. The outdoor shop, Tucumán Aventura, was my first destination after a good night's hotel sleep. 2 weeks of mostly camping had taken its toll of my Almohada Inflable, my inflatable pillow. Taking advantage of the hotel room, I'd blown it up, held it underwater in the sink, and watched tiny bubbles emerge all along the seam. As they only had flight pillows, I next tried Decathlon. They sold me a cheap version which crinkled all night long. So as I would be staying with a friend a week later, he was able to order from Amazon a replacement sea to summit pillow that my head would float on for the next few weeks. Next came Valladolid. It's pronounced in Spain with a B at the beginning, but I won't even try to speak Spanish for you. This was a day that didn't go quite right. I woke at 10:55 a.m. after sleeping from 11 p.m. following a busy evening and deciding I didn't need to plan and download a route as it was fairly obvious which way to go from my maps. I headed towards Camping Cubilas on the N620. Now, there's a strange thing about Spanish roads. Well, they call them roads. When the asphalt and tarmac on the back of the lorry runs out, they leave a compacted dirt track. Leaving Tordesillas, the N620 treated me well until I crossed the ring road with signs to the autovia or motorway. Instead of running alongside the auto here as it had done for the previous 20 kilometers, it decided to upgrade its status and leave me with nothing but a track to bounce and bump my way along. I could see houses and an hotel amongst the trees. This was urbanization El Montico. I made an assumption that there would be service roads and cycle tracks for the residents of this affluent housing area. All I needed to do was ride through the hilly wooded township for about 3 kilometers to reach the village of San Miguel del Pino, 5 kilometers away, and over through the woods, past the big houses, to the far reaches of El Montico, only to discover a sizable fence surrounding the whole urbanization. Turn round, back up, over through the woods, past the big houses, negotiate the security guard who had allowed me through his barrier with a cheery wave 30 minutes earlier. I was no further on, had used up a fair amount of the day's energy, was still facing the dirt track alongside the motorway, and it was heading towards mid-afternoon. With no real option, I stuck with the track, taking the long way round to San Miguel, ending up on a very pleasant route through villages built around the Douro River, many kilometers away from the direction I'd hoped for. As an aside, I recognized it as the same Douro River I'd seen in Portugal last year, hundreds of kilometers to the west. Then it started raining, heavily. I'd reached Valladolid and reckoned the main attraction was going to be an Airbnb due to the rain. Stopping by the river, I found a place, swapped messages, booked it, and was in within 20 minutes. Of course, it had to be an old city apartment, and my flat was on the 4th floor. The owner, who I never met, opened the big, heavy doors from the street and into her flat remotely from her phone, somewhere that could have been next door or next country. I didn't see much of Valladolid's attractions, ensuring I slept well, was up early, and away the following morning. The village of Torquemada was the birthplace of the infamous Grand Inquisitor Thomas de Torquemada in the 15th century. He was assigned the ill-defined task of upholding Catholic religious orthodoxy. His somewhat unorthodox methods included using torture to extract confessions and burning at the stake for those declared guilty of not following the Catholic faith. Staying in the village, I swapped messages with my friend Andy, who strongly advised I keep my heretical lifestyle to myself. Burgos came and went. We're now somewhere near the top of Spain. And with continuing wet weather, I stayed at a Camino hostel with about 15 walkers on their way to Santiago de Compostela from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port in southern France. They were all individuals or couples, but the camaraderie was infectious, and they were great company for the evening. I was still riding up on the plain of Spain, regularly hitting over 1,000 meters above sea level, with many long, straight, hilly roads. I discovered the rain in Spain falls mainly on me. Of course, this means some great descents as well as ascents. There's hilltop churches and ruins of churches in quite remote places. Were they built to impress, built out of devotion and faith, or as an insurance for the afterlife? I guess we'll never know. Reaching the Rioja region meant the best Spanish red wine coming up. Santo Domingo de la Calzada meant a poor campsite with gritty ground and a permanent shanty town of caravans with sheds, chalets, fences, green tarpaulin, and astroturf. Whatever happened to open green fields where you camped anywhere, but at least I had my bottle of Rioja. On the way to Logroño, I kept crossing the Santiago route with regular Buen Caminos exchanged with walkers. At Mendario, it was time for a 3-cake coffee stop: macaroon, pastel del nata, and fruit tart. The joys of cycle touring. The owner told me he only had a little English. I agreed I only had a little Spanish, but on discovering I was riding from Tarifa to England, he declared in his finest Inglés, "You are a rock." Full of his cakes, this rock rolled away downhill. I was finally off the plane I had climbed onto after Seville, 1,000 kilometers and 11 days earlier. I was now on the road to Zizur Mayor on the outskirts of Pamplona. I secretly hoped admiring cafe man wouldn't let me pay for the cakes, but I obviously didn't hope strongly enough. By now, the Pyrenees were, if not in sight, certainly in mind. After stopping in Pamplona for lunch, the road started going upwards. As usual, the smallest villages had the longest or most complicated names. A friend back home suggested this word, I won't even try to pronounce it. A friend back home suggested that would be a really high score in Scrabble. The road climbed. I stayed at a delightful campsite in the mountains, setting off in the cool of the morning, ready for some steady uphill. It was idyllic riding in true cycle touring style. I stopped in the heart of the Pyrenees, took out the Trangia stove, made coffee, sat back and read my Kindle. Finally dragging myself away from this perfect setting, something clicked in my head and told me I had left my phone charger plugged in at the campsite. I'd ridden 17 kilometers uphill. My internal conversation went something along these lines: "Oh dear, oh my, what a nuisance." However, it came out as an external conversation with myself, a bit stronger than this. After a hurried phone call to the campsite to ensure it was still there, I rolled back downhill in a third of the time it had taken to ride uphill, collected the charger, and set off again on the planned route over the Pyrenees with a super descent down to Saint-Jean-de-Luz on the southwestern Atlantic coast of France. It had added 34 kilometres to the ride, yet it was probably still my best day on the bike because of the beautiful mountain roads. In a recent conversation with my wife, she made the obvious and sensible question, why didn't you just hide the 20 kilograms of pannier bags in the woods while you went back to retrieve the missing article? I sheepishly answered, I don't know why. Leaving the tent and the bike to look after themselves, I walked into the town on the beach, reminding my legs that they are for paddling instead of pedaling for once. The following day led me into long, straight, flat roads along the coast and inland to Bordeaux. Another big city to get lost in, another overwhelmingly beautiful cathedral, pedestrian areas, sun, bars, and cafes. Saint-Emilion, world famous for its fine wine, is a medieval village that sold me half a bottle of red to go with that evening's pasta. What was less attractive was the storm that happened overnight and my schoolboy error in pitching at the lowest point of the campsite. Near Libourne, I stayed with old friends, which at about the halfway point gave time for catching up, washing almost everything I owned, watching a full stage of the Giro d'Italia, the equivalent in Italy of the Tour de France that I'd been following as 5-minute highlights on YouTube each evening, and reflecting on the journey so far. The reflections included noting I had received no beeps at all from drivers throughout Spain. Without exception, they had all been courteous since Gibraltar. There were many bike lanes alongside the roads through Spain and France, and at roundabouts and road crossings, cars and lorries almost always give way to cycles. Trouble was, brought up in car culture Britain, I never trusted them to really stop, and so braked unnecessarily on many occasions. Cheers. Another reflection was a conversation with my dad many years ago when he took up Crown Green bowling in his retirement. He laughingly explained that it's too easy to roll a bowl across a patch of smooth grass, so the planners put a bias into the bowl to make it roll round corners, and the green, at least in the north of England, is built with a crown in the centre to make it more difficult. French road builders clearly have the same heritage. The roads are long and flat, but that's too easy. So they add a 0.5 to 1% gradient. Then somehow they throw in clouds above travelling in the same direction, yet also a rising headwind at road level, determined to hold me back. If it's seen that I'm actually making progress, then they turn on the rain. And they did. It started. In France, I tended to stay away from the major towns, or maybe there weren't so many as in Spain. After the harshness and high altitude of Spain, Western France offered lowland rolling terrain with massive fields of wheat, barley, corn, and rye, and rain. Many of my photographs present, if not sunny backgrounds, then at least bright, easy riding days. I think that's because the phone camera didn't come out of my pocket on wet days. I dripped my way through Poitiers and continued heading north. The last time I had been at Saumur in the Loire Valley with my wife last year, the river was a disappointing dribble in the centre of a very shallow valley. This time, the contrast couldn't be more startling. With the amount of rain that had fallen, the River Loire was in full flow and displaying its majestic beauty completely. I arrived at Petit Moulin Renaissance, a beautiful centuries-old mill, just as the rain stopped, and was able to see it in all its sunny, beautiful, medieval glory. Patrick, the owner, explained Richard Coeur de Lion, Richard the Lionheart, had something to do with it. He was English, but spent most of his adult life in Aquitaine, France, despite being King of England for 10 years. The mill had been taken over by the English in the Middle Ages, so I offered an apology and he accepted. We didn't come to blows. Le Mans was next, again examined under a blanket of cloud and drizzle. The cathedral wasn't the most beautiful, with a collection of buttresses and a square tower appearing to have been added to at different times over the last few hundred years. there were far more tourists and participants across the road at a city-based baseball competition. At Le Guy-Lyon, I gave up struggling with the rain and again bailed out to an Airbnb. I was prompted to it on another wooded long straight, imperceptibly uphill drag, where I came across an ornate shrine, the Chapelle de Vierge de Simeon. From the internet, here's what it looks like in sunnier weather. A long way from anywhere, why it was built and with no indication of what purpose it served meant nothing to me at that moment. The porch protected me from the pouring rain and constant drips from the high overhanging pine trees. I managed to creak the door open, made myself known to the Virgin of Simeon and thanked her profusely for allowing me to drip on the floor by the altar, retrieve my stove and make coffee to try and warm up. The builders a couple of hundred years ago had the foresight to include 3G internet reception, and after about 45 minutes, I was back out into the rain and on my way to surprise the Airbnb owners and drip at La Petite Épinay, who hadn't realised I had made the booking. Falaz was the birthplace of Guillaume le Conquérant, or William the Conque, as we know him. This was his birthplace, this castle. It looks as though it's made of concrete, but actually it was built 1,000 years ago. Since 1944, the town has been somewhat overshadowed by what is known as the Falaise Pocket. British, Canadian, and American troops surrounded and circled the remnants of the German army and trapped them in the final Battle of Normandy. It's impossible to visit the area without the emotional turmoil of coming to terms with how many thousands of troops died on all sides in such a short space of time. The next big town to offer a maze of roads and cycle tracks for me to get lost in was Caen. Again, the area is infused with World War II memories. Alongside the Caen Canal, which runs from the sea to where the Battle of Normandy took place, just one of many sites is the Pegasus Bridge, captured by the Allied troops to prevent German reinforcements pouring in. On a beautiful sunny afternoon, with the cafe in full swing, tourists with beers and ice creams, it's hard to imagine the horrors of what must have happened. All I could do was raise a toast that evening to the many people that made it possible for me to make my way to the coast at Ouistreham. Despite an odd mix-up in finding the Airbnb I'd promised myself in Ouistreham, it served me well. It started, though, with an irritated response from the woman who opened the door at number 4 Boulevard Boivin-Champeau, telling me to go down the passage next door to number 4 Boulevard Boivin-Champeau. I did as I was told and found where I was supposed to be. I didn't know the French for get your house numbers sorted out, so I kept quiet. Navigation on this trip was reliant on paper maps copied from road atlases, as well as on Strava, the phone app, to plan and track rides, and a Garmin GPS head unit, getting ahead of myself there, sorry, on the bike, which acted as a sat-nav. I was able to plan routes mainly away from the main roads with detours to areas of interest. Strava recorded all my rides, which is how I'm able to be sure of the distance. And it also has a feature called Local Legend and gives kudos to the cyclist who has covered a particular road section the greatest number of times in 90 days. As I checked out the route to the ferry port on arriving at Ouistreham, as well as riding it on the morning of my departure, I now have the dubious honour of being the local legend of the route through the ferry terminal. La Manche, the French name for the English Channel, was kind to me with a very smooth crossing to Portsmouth. That's where the kindness stopped. I was really shocked at the appalling driving of Hampshire drivers who were fast, impatient, aggressive, and aggressive, and within an hour, I'd received more beeping horns than in Spain and France put together. This was compensated for me by a calm, quiet night camping on a wide-open farmer's field. The field was wide open, not the farmer. But it was good to be back amongst English-speaking people and English pubs again. Interestingly, the driving became calmer and safer the further north I cycled. from Hampshire through Wiltshire, Gloucestershire, Worcestershire, Shropshire, and Cheshire. It felt important to immerse myself in Englishness, so I sat for an hour watching a village green cricket match. I've never really played much, but was brought up watching my dad play for a church team and my mum scoring each week. It was comforting to see the same low quality of amateur cricket that I remember so well. The following morning, I indulged in a full English breakfast in a bread bun from G&J's Mobile Catering, with the expected full heavy feeling lasting till midday. Passing through Wiltshire, I took the opportunity to see Stonehenge, especially having read about a free viewing site. Strangely, the approach was eerily quiet due to a couple of miles of roadworks closing the road to traffic. I was allowed through by a workman, but then reprimanded by another as I exited the system. On finding the visitor centre, I discovered it's nearly 3 miles from there to Stonehenge, which has to be covered by dedicated coach, on foot, or by bicycle. The moody skies and prevention of onlookers getting closer than 15 metres to the henge allowed me to capture this satisfying picture. Looking online for my next campsite led me to the Barge Inn. As it was a bank holiday weekend, I phoned ahead and discovered there was a music festival taking place, but I would be welcomed, could camp and join in the festivities. With a white horse cut out of the hillside and also hosting an annual pilgrimage for crop circle fans, the Acid Horse 3-day festival was an introduction to acid house music that I'm happy to leave behind. Bizarrely, the main DJ for the weekend was Steve Davis of Snooker World Championship fame. Through Devizes and 2 villages called Norton, I continued towards the northwest and my next tourist experience of Coalport and Coalbrookdale. Staying at the youth hostel in one of the old industrial buildings allowed me to dip into the history of the area at the heart of the Industrial Revolution. With local china clay and iron ore, it's famous for pottery production. Telford's Iron Bridge, the first of its kind to span the River Severn, is a superb example of skilled iron engineering dating from 1779. All is now calm, peaceful and tranquil, but it must have been a smelly, dirty, hard-working area in its heyday. Naturally, the highlight for me was Ellie's world-famous hand-raised pork pie shop. If only I'd known previously that it was world-famous, I would have checked it was known in Gibraltar, Spain and France. So that's most of the where. Now let me introduce the who. There were so many, and I was so genuinely touched by how generous total strangers often were when they found out about the fundraising for MD UK. There were the German tourists who poured out of the coach in front of me at the summit of the first hill between Gibraltar and Tarifa. They were intent, as I was, on taking snaps of the view over the Straits of Gibraltar to Morocco. I felt I had earned the view. They'd simply paid someone to drive them there. On my second campsite, beyond Tarifa, I met a young cycle tourist from London. It transpired he'd flown to Gibraltar an hour after me to ride home on a similar route. We never met again after meeting him, but I decided I would ask for names and pictures of people I spoke with along the way, especially cyclists. Werner from Switzerland was impressive with a lot more baggage than me. We swapped information about the road ahead. He told me keenly of a motor racing circuit nearby. All I saw was a car park at the roadside. My neighbours in the tent next to me at Camping Lagos generously gave me iced coffee. She with the beautiful name of Africa, insisted I should visit Granada, her hometown. He, Ishmael, was excited that I had cycled through his town bordering Gibraltar. He pronounced it correctly as, let me get it right, La Línea de la Concepción. Excuse me for bending my nose up. My first introduction to the Spanish S sound being pronounced TH. Pat, the Irishman, not an instruction, but a name, at the campsite outside Seville, offered me half of his half-dozen eggs. He left them outside my tent late evening, and as I departed early the following morning before he was around, I still feel bad about not thanking him. Francisca Mendez Garrido. I met this lady overlooking the coffee shop I stopped in Jerez, or Jerez. She didn't say much, but looked as though she had been an amazing singer. Described as La Paquera de Jerez on the plaque below, Google Translate told me she was actually the flirtation of Jerez. From southern Portugal, Odette and I shared the road, the rain, and the coffees. We were only with each other on the bikes for about 20 kilometers or so, but it was great to ride together. She was cycling the Camino route to Santiago de Compostela from Seville and found her Camino albergue or hostel shortly before my campsite showed up. She graciously cycled at my touring pace, and because it was such a morale booster for us, we've both kept in touch. The cycle tourist who had ridden from Cologne put my little jaunt into perspective. By this time, I had a tailwind making all the difference to my average speed, which meant she had the headwind, but she was still able to smile and laugh about it. Although I didn't really meet them, at the cafe bar in a tiny village near Torquemada, I gingerly pushed open the door to see if it was open. The two aged men at the bar turned to acknowledge me. The owner brought free biscuits to accompany my coffee when he discovered how far I had travelled. As I sat contentedly munching and Kindle reading, one by one, 20 or so elderly lycra-clad cyclists clip-clopped in on their racing shoe cleats. It was clearly the 10:30 meeting place for that week's club run. They had a passing interest in me, but had so much to chatter about in that typically loud, assertive Spanish way that they mostly ignored me. Then from California came Ian. He had walked down from his Camino hostel to take photos of the bridge I was also stood on taking photos. We stopped stories, swapped names and phone numbers, and he'll be contacting me when he gets round to visiting Northern England, he promised. On the slopes of the Pyrenees, Angel, in his high-vis working gear, cheered me on, so I stopped for a chat. He was fascinated by my Claude Butler touring bike, telling me of his friend who is currently cycling around the world, and insisted on giving me detailed instructions of a route to follow, avoiding the N121, instead taking the Bidasoa Via Verde, or Green Road. The following morning, stuck on the busy N121 with heavy traffic thundering past, was when I remembered his wise words and realised the Via Verde was the other side of the valley over the river with no bridges for 8 kilometres. It was such a relief to eventually find and follow his quiet old railway line route. Hurtling down the French side of the Pyrenees and country lanes cut into the majestic, beautiful countryside, I stopped to try and help Cecile. She was a French cyclist, and she told me almost immediately, national triathlete champion in her age group only days earlier. She was walking up the steep hillside barefooted as her rear gear mechanism had seized. Barefooted because her shoes and racing cleats gave no traction on the steep gradient. Not convinced I could fix the problem, I nevertheless grabbed my selection of tools, only to find the 2mm Allen key I needed was still on my workbench, or perhaps in the musette on its way back home. In my defence, there are no 2mm Allen bolts on my bike, which is why I hadn't brought it. In the short time we talked, she offered food and an overnight stay if I passed through her town near Bordeaux the following week. Friends were coming out to collect her by car from Pamplona, so she was assured of a lift home. Then what a treat it was to meet Julio from Madrid. I tucked into bread and cheese, admiring the city, watching the passers-by and listening to his accordion playing, recognising many of his tunes. As he started with Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen, I wandered over and asked if I could join in with my harmonica. He was very friendly and keen that I should play along. It's probably the strangest duet that buskers have played outside Bordeaux Cathedral, but it gave me a good feeling. So much so that I walked away with a smile, forgetting to throw some money in his busker's hat. So if you're watching this, Julio, let me know your bank details. As part of an online harmonica group, My fellow players had challenged me to play for everyone I met and spoke with. So when Fred from Hungary agreed to take my photograph by the painted bicycle, not only did he seem to enjoy my playing, but insisted on me going with another tune while he videoed it for his website. He was passionate about environmental issues and keen for me to check his website, which I did later. Raphael, the campsite assistant at Sant'Emilion, couldn't have been more friendly and helpful. Too bad he didn't predict the overnight storm and flood where I pitched my tent. Now, I've no idea who this woman is, and I've no desire to meet her ever again. Presumably, these two are her granddaughters and have been subjected to a typical French picnic. She arrived just as I was leaving the table with no acknowledgement of me. The disapproving face could have turned milk sour. The French soldier holding up the wreath took my interest, more for the fact of someone's intricate painting that must have to be renewed regularly, but I didn't play him a tune. On my campsite in the Loire Valley, near Saumur, I met this couple of German cyclists. Again, it was just great to swap cycling stories from the road. And on returning to England, it became so much easier to engage in conversation through assuming everyone to be English and speaking the same language. From the motorcyclist at G&J's, where I had my breakfast sandwich, to Freddie, the cyclist from Guernsey, who was riding to a friend's party in Tidworth. It was almost like speaking to a young me. He was 17 years old and inspired by my ride, and soon talking about plans for where he would like to go by bike. There was also the conversation of no more than a minute with car travellers in the queue for border control at Portsmouth, who took my Just Giving details and donated shortly after. Thank you to them. Ant came to a sudden halt as I called out to him, asking about the roadworks near Stonehenge. I'd seen road signs warning me of. I think we got in the way of a lot of traffic stood by the roadside on a narrow lane where cars were having to take a detour as we were talking about my ride, and we swapped Strava details. Some chance meetings, though, have far-reaching consequences. Hitching my bike to the trolley store at Lidl in Devizes, I got talking with Nick. There are some people you just click with straight away, and he was certainly one of them. We've probably stood there for half an hour discussing bike rides and long-distance touring. With his intention of touring in Scotland sometime, I suggested he would be welcome to stay over on his way travelling north. In a series of messages, he made it clear that he'd been inspired to take on a much bigger and longer challenge, retracing the route he and his wife took on a Lambretta from Dieppe to Toulon for their honeymoon, but this time by bike. His wife of 55 years had recently had a heart attack, but had now recovered, so he wanted to raise money for British Heart Foundation. Leaving Devizes, the Garmin took me over Bowden Hill, where I lounged in the churchyard with coffee and sandwiches, and then got talking with Wendy, while her clergyman husband sat in their car patiently waiting. At 79 years old, she had youthfulness on her side and plenty of conversation to share, from being born in the war and evacuated as a child to working as a physiotherapist abroad. I stayed at the Tobacconist Farm campsite. Lucy, the owner, kindly let me stay for free, while Alex and Ella, on their first camping trip, chatted with me about my route and their plans for their future together. Jason, the truck driver, on my next campsite, was also taken by my journey, and realizing I was too late for the carvery at the pub next door, brought over a triple-decker pulled pork sandwich. I think he enjoyed the tune I played for him, though his dog went crazy and didn't seem to appreciate it. Of course, this list of people could be extended to all the nameless people on campsites, in shops, cars, and by the roadside who saw this strange figure on a bike and were fascinated enough to engage or be engaged in conversation. How I use my time. As well as cycling on most days, uphill, downhill, and on the flat, setting up and taking down my camping stuff, eating a lot, drinking, and keeping up with bits of social media, I made time for sightseeing and satisfying my sudden curiosity about many things and people I saw along the way. I was surprised by how comfortable the folding chair was that came with my Thermarest sleeping mat. Altogether, I must have spent many hours curled up in it reading my Kindle. The joy of cycle touring is what author and podcaster Andrew Sykes calls Goldilocks riding. Not too fast, not too slow, just right for being able to stop easily whenever you feel like it. I averaged around 16 kilometers per hour or 10 miles per hour over the whole trip, which is considerably slower than if I was out for a morning's ride from home. Thinking now of adjectives to describe the myriad sensations I experienced, I would use words such as joyful, light-hearted, upbeat, happy, cheerful, pottering, and faffing. Not much went wrong, though the weather wasn't quite as good as I'd hoped. In fact, it sent its companions headwind and rain to keep me company on more days than I would have liked. Actually, most of my pictures reflect the good days, though, and I look back and only remember the blissful tailwind-assisted endless days of easy cycling, baguettes, cheese, coffee, and red wine. I loved the mountains, the forests, the big open skies, the rolling hills, and the flatlands, and the sitting reading or not doing much. What? The bike, tent, and stove were reliable, honest, full of integrity, and trustworthy. The roads and the weather were unreliable and conspired against me at times, yet at other times were idyllic and superb company. Every so often, the bike and I had aches and creaks. If it was me, I rubbed the offending area, slowed down, rested, drank coffee, or ignored it. I surprised myself by sleeping a lot. On the days of over 100 kilometers, I would wake and realize I'd slept for 9 or 10 hours. As much as I would like to be a morning person, it was always an ordeal to climb out of the cozy sleeping bag or hotel bed. But once up, the thought of going for a day's bike ride was great. If it was the bike creaking, then shifting the panniers often helped. Tightening a bolt here and there might be necessary, along with pumping tires and lubing the chain. Once I left Gibraltar, surprisingly, to me, I had just 3 days off the bike out of 47. Some days were shorter than others, and I aimed to finish riding between 4 and 5 p.m. The only letdown from the bike I knew was my fault, through the chain catching on a protruding bolt. The damage being done, I found a bike shop in Merida with a superbly grumpy bike shop owner who replaced the chain, which promptly fell off 1 kilometre later. I had a split link and I could have repaired it, but chose to walk back to the cycle shop. Calmly, I presented the offending item and he grumpily repaired it yet again with no word of apology. Beyond this, the bike behaved itself and performed impeccably, even after 14 years of this sort of cycle touring punishment. Similarly, the tent was easily pitched with its 1 pole and 8 pegs within minutes. The sleeping mat welcomed me aboard and I easily slept at night after long days in the saddle. If only I could have started a bit sooner in the day, but as all cycle tourists will attest to, it's important to engage in faffing. The dictionary defines this as spending time in ineffectual activity. That's me. I'm good at that. So back to where. From before the ride, I'd been looking forward to the last few days as 2 very good cycling friends, Chris and Karen, were coming out to meet me in Nantwich. That was me. This is them. Due to meet me in Nantwich and ride the last 3 days with me through Cheshire, Shropshire and Lancashire. Meeting in the Nantwich bookshop, coffee lounge was a delight, and in true cycle touring form, we faffed. Eventually setting off with another coffee stop on the way to a remarkably good Premier Inn at Winwick. Great teamwork emerged. They were tremendous company for me, with good pacing skills after I'd reminded them to set off at touring pace and slow down on hills for me. With about 35 miles left of the 1,982 total, I had my one and only puncture. Many hands make light work, and with 3 experts on the job, a new tube was fitted and amazingly stayed up for the rest of the journey. The penultimate day took us to Garstang, where I stayed overnight and prepared for a leisurely 19 miles home to Gibraltar Farm. more cycling friends joined us along the way to the finish line. When I came up with this idea of Gibraltar to Gibraltar Farm, I imagined finishing the ride with a satisfied grin on my face, turning round and riding the 4 miles home to let my wife know that I'd completed what I set out to do. She and our 3 daughters had other ideas, however, and arranged a fantastic welcoming party with Andy and many other friends, with Andy joining in for the final 20 metres of the route. And this picture, I believe, sums up my style of cycle touring. Thank you for listening. That's me. Thank you. Over to Steve.
Right, hang on. Just put my video back on. Here we go. That was
Caught you out.
wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tim. That was excellent. We've had a few questions come in before we get to that. Few little nuggets that came up in the chat. One from me in particular is I'm a huge fan of your purple bar tape. Extra style point, and I know a lot of folk are agreeing with me on that. And everyone also, whenever there was food or drink mentioned, was always like, "Oh, maybe I could go for some churros right now." So,
Yeah.
and from one of the lovely things about your talk there, Tim, is talking a lot about the people that you meet along the way, which I think is quite often the theme with most of the best bike rides is about the folk you meet along the way. And I was particularly thinking about when you meet folk and they tell you what the best route to go is, because when you do the routing on the Garmin and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
it can, it doesn't know. It doesn't know the way a local does, and there's nothing beats that kind of like, oh, if you go here and then you go there, then you always get the very best of the world that
You
way.
have to remember that they've told you it, though. That was the trouble. Angel got a piece of paper out and wrote copious notes on this paper of where to go, which road, where the Via Verde was. I stuffed it in my pocket and completely forgot about it by the following day until I was on the wrong road.
Um, on to the questions. The first question
Mm.
you did answer this at the start, but I actually missed the answer to this as well, which was what time of year was your trip?
Oh, it was April last year that I started. Mid-April to June the 2nd, I think I finished. About
Okay,
7 weeks.
so
Yeah,
like spring
yeah.
into summer.
Yeah, well, that was my intention. The reason for going that route as well was I naively thought if I fly a long way away south and then ride north, the sun will be going north as well at roughly the same speed as me. Um, but there was a lot of rain, actually, a lot of cloud, a lot of rain, which I wasn't expecting.
Mhm.
But I had plenty of good clothes with me, and I can't say. I would honestly say the finest piece of cycle clothing I have ever bought in over 50 years of cycling is my Shake Dry Gore-Tex jacket. The ones that they've now stopped making because of I don't know, whatever material it is that was in them. But
Mm.
I think they brought out a new equivalent, but best piece of kit ever. Absolutely, totally waterproof for a whole day's cycling.
Mhm. Yeah, I have one too. They're absolutely wonderful.
They're great.
Ben is asking about how did you find? Do you have any difficulty finding campsites in Spain?
Not really. And to be honest, the only way I did it really was Google Maps. Um, and I have a camper van app that I use as well called Search for Sites, which is
Mhm.
very, very good because that has free camping airs for motorhomes and camper vans, but it also has campsites. And
Mhm.
but Google Maps, if you just put campsite near me, they will all pop up. That was generally how I found them. And by traveling, I was cycling from mid-April, and of course by then campsites were starting to open. I
Mhm.
have ridden. I did another long ride a few years ago and made the mistake of setting off in March and finding that campsites often don't open till Easter.
Mhm.
So yeah, more difficult. Interestingly, I didn't stay with any warm showers this trip at all, because in Spain I tried a lot of warm showers people, tried to make contact, and nobody was available or they just didn't answer. And I got a bit fed up with it and stopped trying by the time I got to France, although I have used warm showers quite a lot in the past.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you wild camp at all?
No, I do like a shower at the end of a day's riding.
Yeah.
I, I like it's a bit of creature comforts, I think. I like camping, but yeah, it's the shower that does it for me. It's nice to put an end to the day and grab a beer from a supermarket on the way or something like that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. In the chat, lots of people agreeing about the shake dry. Um,
Good.
uh, Piers is asking, how did you find getting hold of meths for your transit abroad?
Ah, that's an interesting one. It's becoming less common. Beware now. What was it? I got. Mm, I got some in southern Spain. No, I bought some in southern Spain because there was nobody had even heard of methylated spirits in Gibraltar.
Mhm,
Amazingly, I thought they would have because it's very it is English there.
mhm,
Couldn't get any at any of the hardware shops. Over the border into Spain, I got some. It wasn't meths. It was some other kind of alcohol that worked perfect. It was actually better than meths. It burnt hotter than meths, and that lasted me till well into France. And I think I got some meths in France, whatever it's called there. I don't know. A funny story about that is when I was cycling through Italy a few years ago, I called in a chemist for some methylated spirits or alcohol denaturato or whatever they call it there. I walked into this chemist shop and there it's not like our pharmacies. It was full of very beautiful women because they sold a lot of makeup and perfumes and things. I asked for this methylated spirits and the woman behind the counter was aghast because she thought I was going to drink it.
Yeah,
And I said, no, it's for camping. And that scared her even more because she thought I was going to use it in my cooking, especially when I said, no, it's for camping and cooking in my sort of pidgin Italian. It took a while before she understood that I meant it was for actually the stove.
yeah.
And I wasn't going to drink the stuff.
I wonder if it was isopropyl alcohol he had. That
No, I don't. No, I don't think it was.
okay. That does
No,
that.
that
Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. It does work in a transit, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. And you
right.
can
Okay. Yeah.
you can get that in a lot of places. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Also good for cleaning disc brakes. Anyway,
Yes, that's right.
and everyone's calling alcool à brûler, and it's clear, not blue, and quite easy to get in France, apparently.
And what's it called again?
Alcool à brûler. I don't speak any French.
That was it. That was it. That's what I
Yeah,
got. Yes.
there we
Alcohol
go.
brûlée. Yes.
Um, okay, we've got time for one more question, I think, Tim.
Yeah.
Someone is asking about you were in a tunnel style tent. How did you find how did you find being in a tunnel tent, and would you use it again for such a trip?
Yeah, a great tent. It's a is it Wild Country? I think I had a Terra Nova which was very similar that unfortunately got stolen. Actually, I had a bag stolen some time ago, and the really good tent was in it. So I replaced it with this Wild Country
Yeah, it was a
Zephyr or
wild
something
country.
like
I saw
that.
in the photos. Yeah.
That that's the one, yeah. Which it's probably about 3 or 4 centimeters lower than the Terra Nova. So I was bumping my head when I sat in this little rocking chair thing that I've got. But no, it was fine. It's tiny, but yeah, I like it because of the weight. It's only just over 1 kilogram. It
Mm.
packs down very small. That's the advantage of it. Yeah.
Okay, I said there's time for one more question, but I spotted another one that I quite like as well. So
Okay.
if you've got the time, we'll answer it.
Yeah, it's
Um,
okay.
Someone is saying, as a massive faffer, I want to know if you got quicker or just rolled with the faffing.
I roll with the faffing. I despair of myself. Yeah. No, it's I've perfected it as an art. I can be a good 2 hours from waking up to actually leaving in the morning, which doesn't bother me that much because I just enjoy it. That's part of the trip for me.
Yeah,
I can get away quicker if I need to, but I suppose something in my head says I'll just do this. I'll just do that. And the Kindle actually was my great companion. I read a lot, just and I pick the Kindle up and start reading it over a cup of tea and just keep on reading and reading and then see the time's gone by.
yeah. Do you know
Yeah.
it? it's still a holiday, isn't it? You didn't.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Faffing is absolutely something that you should do. All right, one last
Yeah.
question. How did the
Yeah.
fundraising go?
Really good, thank you. I've played that down on this talk because that wasn't the aim of it. But yeah, I raised over £2,000 without too much effort, I have to say, on my part. And it was nice to include that as part of the ride. I decided to do the ride before I knew about my friend Andy, so that was just a little added extra to it. I was knocked over by how generous people were, total strangers would give money. It was great.
Fantastic. Well, on behalf of everyone, thank you so much for the talk, Tim. I think everyone's had
Thank you.
a wonderful time. Thanks to everyone else for coming along, for all the lovely questions that you've asked, um, and for listening to Tim. There is loads more stuff on the cards later this week. We've got Marcus Stitt talking about cargo bikes. We've got people whose names I've forgotten talking about other cool stuff. Not very good at remembering names. But have a look on the Cycle Touring Festival website. There is loads on for the rest of the week. It's a as it always is a really wonderful lineup. I have just put the link for donating in the chat if you want to go and have a look and donate. And I guess it's just time to say thanks everyone, and hopefully see you later in the week. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.